Hey, David, thanks for joining us today. As way getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey, good to be around. My name is David Dennison. I'm a senior sales consultant. I work in the PEO industry, primarily supporting financial services firms and their portfolio companies. I'm from Texas originally, traveled around a bit after that, and made my way to Florida, where I'm working remotely from my house, spending most of my time hanging out with a hilarious French bulldog.
Oh, cool. And how'd you get into sales, or why'd you get into sales?
Uh, I was kind of forced into sales. I
By gun?
yeah. It was a knife, but same principle. No, I was don't take offense to this. I've always kind of hated salespeople. Always sort of like resented them. Whatever company I worked at. So I was working at a SaaS company at the time, and was working as a pre-sales engineer. So from my perspective, it was just whenever the sales guys needed help explaining how technology works, they would drag their knuckles over to me and sort of grunt, and I would get on and explain the product in a way that was actually made sense. And that was sort of my only experience professionally of working with salespeople, is that they were always just kind of like the jerks who were like lifting weights while they were like putting with their little putting greens
Yeah, that's
while
what
they're
we do all day. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Just pacing around with like their Bluetooth heads, and that was actually my experience. Like that was still happening at the company that I was working at the time. So I was like, these guys are jerks. I just try to avoid them. I was always very like introverted person, like kind of nerdy kid. Like wasn't really my scene. And yeah, the SaaS company that I was working for, the CEO went on like a drunken bender and like fired all the salespeople, and came in the next morning hungover and was like, David, congratulations. You sell for us now. We've got a pipeline you're going to want to get your arms wrapped around. And also, here's your quota. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a salesperson now. So I just sort of stepped into it and decided I would figure it out. And that's all I've done since.
So it was love at first sight.
Uh huh.
And then
It was more like
shotgun wedding.
yeah, it was more like an arranged marriage.
Yeah. And what was it like the first year?
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Because I had this like absolute panic with it, because I immediately recognized I'm not a salesperson. I'm never gonna be a salesperson, which means if I try to be a salesperson, like if I try to become a salesperson, I'm gonna fail. And I don't want to fail. I was like successful at what I was doing, I've been like a top performer all my life in whatever thing I was doing. So like I don't want to fail at sales, but I know if I try to be a salesperson, I'm gonna fail. So what I decided in my brain was like, I had background in theater and did that some in college, and was like, I don't have to actually be a good salesperson. I just have to be a good actor, and I just have to say the things that a good salesperson would do, or say the things they would say and do the things that they would do. And if I'm good enough at impersonating a good salesperson, my prospects aren't going to know the difference. They're just going to assume that I actually am good, and hopefully I'll close some business. So that was sort of my shtick, and just mentally, I just had the mentality of I just need to find good salespeople and just flawlessly imitate what they're doing. Just I would just memorize verbatim like rebuttals to objections and stuff. And in my brain, I was learning how to pretend to be a salesperson. But eventually, after a couple of years of doing that, I looked back and realized that I'd actually just inadvertently become a salesperson, much to my own dismay.
But was it becoming a great salesperson, or was it just becoming a great person?
Yeah, I don't know that my first year in sales did make me a better person. I think it probably made me a worse
Well,
person for a
you,
little bit there.
your
Uh,
prototype was wrong, wasn't it? It was
yeah,
like,
it was, because my impression of it was I had a negative view of
yeah,
salespeople generally, right? Like I had the perspective that salespeople were just kind of unethical. The salespeople were that the only intention was just to find some schmuck who you could twist their arm into buying your thing. And I didn't really think about it from the perspective of finding needs to solve. And so, early on, I was just trying to learn how to do that so that I didn't get fired. And then over time, I started finding like, oh, there are some companies who are like clients who I've closed who are now coming back to me talking about like how much of a difference it's made for them, and like the impact that it's made, like for their family or for their employees or whatever. And like, oh, there's people who are gonna get fired, but then because of the product that I sold their company, those underperformers were able to eke out above the line and like not get fired. And like starting to see like, oh, I can actually find people who are going to benefit from this thing instead of just trying to find like whoever the most weak-willed buyer is and twist their arm into it. And so I think once I realized that, it has made me a better person because I get to spend my time now. Like I think we're fortunate in sales that while it doesn't have to inherently be exclusively altruistic, it's just a reality that the best prospects to sell to are the prospects who have the greatest need that you can solve. And so for that reason, I've ended up in a position now where I feel very proud of the impact that I'm able to make, and I do feel like I'm a better person for it.
I think this is a mistake that we make, thinking that if I was only so good, everyone would buy, as opposed
Mm,
to there are people who really are well qualified. They may not know it yet, but they have this problem I can solve. They are not aware of it. I can help them become aware of it.
mm. Yeah, agreed.
Because I think too many people go, "Oh, I've got to call 100 strangers today."
Right, right.
Maybe I should look at the 100 and say, who's most likely to have the problem?
Yeah. Or if you are going to call 100 strangers today, uh, if that's the path of least resistance to doing the discovery to find that out, don't beat yourself up when the majority of them don't have a need for you to solve.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the shift in mindset for me, that as I've sort of leveled up in sales and have become very successful at it, has been the I think the change in perspective that has been sort of the key that's unlocked that for me. Is I just recognize I don't have to be all things to all people. I don't have to be like a generalized seller who, like, I don't need to make my interactions with all 100 of those cold prospects palatable. I just need, when I'm talking to the person who is a good fit, I need that person's experience of me to be as strong as it can be. And that may be at odds with making the rest of the interactions with the other people comfortable. So in other words, like modifying the way that I present myself and talk to prospects such that when I am talking to the right person, there's going to be a really strong alignment there, even if that makes it a little bit more tense or less comfortable with the prospects who aren't going to become buyers anyway.
And how long was it before it felt like you were at home, or it was your thing?
I still don't feel that way.
No.
I'm, I'm like,
5 years from now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'll let you know when I get there. No, I never have a comfortable interaction. I never don't feel tremendous anxiety talking to prospects. I think just personality wise, I'm still a very introverted person by nature. I've learned how to have the conversations in a way that's productive, and I've learned how to be good at the job. But it's still not my comfort zone. And I think the change for me has been giving myself permission to not have to be someone other than I am. Um, and giving myself permission to not have to be the guy who can like be super charismatic and like walk into a room and high five everybody. And I think it's just different selling styles, right? And I think
It is.
I think the key is to being like in the top 1% of performers is to find what you are uniquely gifted at and to double down on that. I think we end up with this perception of what the best salespeople are going to be just based on looking at the top, say, 20 or 25% of salespeople in any organization. And for the most part, just because most humans lack the drive to work really hard at something that they're already pretty good at, I think what we end up with is this kind of flawed archetype of what a good salesperson looks like, which is like, the top 20 to 25% of salespeople in any organization are going to be the most extroverted, prototypical, like rapport building guys. But then when you get into the top 1 or 2%, it's very often going to be guys who have found a specific angle that may not fit that traditional archetype. And I think it's very often going to be the case that it doesn't, because they're the people who are driven to be successful, but are not naturally successful enough through their own personality that they have to find a way to do it that makes sense for them. And as a result of that, their entire process becomes far more intentional than it might otherwise be.
I could not agree with you more on that because that's exactly what I've seen happen. And I think people kind of over focus on the prototype and don't even know what good selling is, which is bizarre. Now, how did this work? I can imagine through the interview process, it didn't go as smoothly as you'd like. Is that true? Or
You mean in terms of like
well,
making
as
it?
a sales manager, I'd look at you and I'd be like, okay, where's the fit?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I'll tell you the company that I work for now, I identified them as like a really strong fit, like fell in love with the culture, thought they're amazing, and just decided I'm going to work at this place. Like I told my family, like, hey, this is the good place where I work someday. And I interviewed over a period of almost 3 years. I think probably half a dozen interviews. I applied 25 times and went through the process. And finally, like the last time that I went through the process and I made it to like a panel interview where I was talking to like a group of managers, like at the end of it, I think I ended it by telling them, "Hey, it's been good to see you guys again. I'll see you in 6 months if things don't work out this time." And I think they just eventually realized that I had the tenacity that would potentially allow me to overcome the weaknesses that I might have with respect to the gap between my approach and style and personality versus the kind of traditional prototypical archetype.
And how did you come up to speed? How did you learn how to sell and how people buy? Because
So
you were almost in the negative category because of
yeah,
the prototype you had.
definitely. Yeah, my degree's in psychology, and early on, I when I was just trying to emulate good salespeople, I just consumed tons and tons of sales literature, read every sales book that most people would be familiar with. Just spent hours watching YouTube videos of people cold calling and like try to find talk tracks that would work and just memorize them. And and that got me by for a little while. But then once I got comfortable having those conversations and sort of had a baseline that I could put on autopilot, I really started leaning more on my psychology background than anything, and really thinking back to like classes on like counseling approaches, as silly as that might sound, and just realizing that for me, as someone who doesn't have to talk in a social environment, that's a real strength that most salespeople don't possess, and really learning the power of silence, the power of listening intently, and the power of asking questions that get to the real root of what's being discussed, as opposed to feeling a social need to have a comfortable conversation.
I like the therapy analogy because it fits in a lot of selling.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of my meetings with prospects end up sounding like. They end up sounding like conversations with a therapist. Like when I play it back and when I hear it, it's like they'll say like, "Well, yeah, we're looking for something like this. I think because we've been losing a lot of our staff lately. We've had a really high turnover, so we've got to do something differently." Instead of just saying like, "Oh yeah, we can absolutely help with that. This is what we do. Here's how we're going to fix it." My response is like more similar to that of like your shrink, to just say like, "That's interesting. Tell me more about that. Tell me more
Right.
about the impact that's had."
But you never see a therapist just tell them the answer.
Right, right.
What you need to do is get rid of that bum
Yeah,
and
yeah,
focus on yourself.
yeah.
Therapist takes them along that journey. And is that your approach today? It's more like questions, listening, digging.
Certainly, yeah. I think the one thing that I would add to that that's been, I think, instrumental for me in the success that I've achieved in the last couple of years specifically is a really intentional focus on radical transparency, absolute honesty with prospects and clients without exception. So if I think a prospect is lying to me about something, I'll tell them that. If I think that if I think they're saying something that's stupid, I mean, I won't be like so blunt that it's socially rude. I'll kind of cushion it gently, and I'll try to do it in like a lighthearted way. But if a prospect says to me like on a cold call, like, Actually, yeah, that's fine. But how about this? Could you just reach back out to me in 6 months, and we can talk. Then we got a lot going on right now. Like instead of like what I used to do, which is to say, okay, great, I'll reach back out to you in 6 months. So I'm putting it on my calendar right now. I can't wait. Like I'll say to them,
It's a
yeah,
9-month deal, right?
yeah, exactly. I'll say to them, you know what, Brian, I'm gonna be honest with you. Totally get that I'm like interrupting your day and you're not expecting the call. But when most people tell me to call them in 6 months, what it really means is
Don't
I don't
call
want to
me in
talk to you
six
right
months.
now. Uh, and I prefer that you hadn't called me, but I'm a nice person. I don't want to hurt your feelings. Is it fair for me to guess that that's probably what's happening right now? That you just don't want to talk to me? And now we're having like an actual conversation like humans. Because and I think what a lot of salespeople don't recognize is like your prospect knows that you know that they're lying. So when you and even if you're in the middle of a deal and they give you like something that feels like a BS line or a fake objection or whatever, and like if they're like say they're beating you up on pricing and you know that you've already discussed pricing that wasn't a problem, where you're approaching the end of the deal, so you're just trying to see what they can squeeze out of you at the end there. Like your prospect knows that you know that they're lying or that they're not being totally forthcoming with you. If you choose to allow that in the relationship with them, then you're conveying to them that this is not an equal relationship. This is not a relationship that has the same expectations for them that it does for you. Because if you were dishonest with them, they would refuse to do business with you. So I just refuse to do business with buyers who are dishonest with me, and I hold them accountable to the same standards that I hold myself accountable to. And that radical transparency of just saying whatever it is that I'm thinking or feeling in the midst of those interactions, actually like it can feel a little bit abrasive. And like if there's other sales consultants who are like on a meeting with me, they get uncomfortable and like they want to like jump in and apologize. Well, like just and just sit in silence. And then they always come clean. And it just like it relieves the tension. And now we're having a real conversation. Now we know what the actual problem is so that we can find a solution for it, as opposed to us both pretending that it's something that we both know it's not.
Right, because you get off of the rep prospect treadmill
Yeah.
and you just start talking like people.
Yeah.
And then you'll find out what the real issue is. Maybe it's not a match, or maybe it will be in 6 months. Well, what got you to that point? Was there an initiative on your side?
Um, yeah, I think what got me there is just the frustration of playing a subordinate role in the seller and buyer dynamic. Um, I just became frustrated feeling like the power dynamic shift in the relationship. Like as soon as they identify that they can get away with something, then you lose the power in the relationship. And when you lose the power in the relationship, you lose the deal in most cases, in my experience. So I just got tired of seeing that happen and just decided I'm not gonna try to like be like overly nice for the sake of preserving the feelings of someone who's not going to buy from me in response to it. Like it's not a fruitful thing. It's intuitive. It
It
feels
is
like the right
intuitive.
thing to do,
Yeah.
but the reality is they lose respect for you. They stop viewing you as the person with the solution that they need, and it sort of shifts subconsciously for them the power dynamic in a way that I think is less favorable.
And this is a mindset in salespeople because they rationalize it by giving good service. But we're not in service, we're in sales,
Yeah.
where we should be peer to peer and doing the right things for each other. Because once you go down that social hierarchy, then they have all the power. You're a commodity, you're a thing. You're here to
Agreed.
serve me, not us to solve something.
And I think it's silly too, like because it doesn't actually make any sense. If you're talking to somebody who has a need that you are the person who's uniquely positioned to help them solve, like if anything, that you have the power in that situation. Like I don't know how to fix a car, so when my car's not running and I drive to a mechanic, Like I am just totally at the discretion and like will, and I just have to totally rely on the mechanic to help me fix my car because I don't know how to do it. And if I'm like a jerk to him, like my mechanic's not going to tolerate me being like disrespectful to him or like questioning the process or like jerking him around. Like he recognizes the dynamic there. Like he understands I don't know how to fix this problem on my own. Therefore, I have to be the one who's like polite to him and like try to like obviously still be professional and still treat me like a human or whatever. But as far as like power dynamic, like it's just not true that the person with the money has the power in sales. The person who has the solution has the power.
Right. And we tend to cow down to them, and it doesn't do us any benefit. We think it does by being, whatever you need, answering every question, giving every sample, whatever it is, but it isn't. Where did you get that confidence?
It's funny. Uh, in becoming successful in sales as a result of like hustle and willpower, uh, rather than through that level of confidence and skill, I was able to achieve enough success and enough financial stability that I think inherently started feeling more like a peer to the buyers who I'm talking to. I think when you're a new salesperson or when you're struggling as a salesperson, and the natural implication of that is that you're struggling financially as well. The impact is when you're talking to an executive, especially in a B2B context, where you're talking to the decision maker at a successful company who you're trying to sell an expensive product to. It's really easy to view yourself as a different kind of human than that person is, and to view yourself as not being their equal. And in that, I think that comes through, and they can smell that, like they detect that, they pick up on the fact that you're not taking charge, that you're not confident, that you're not treating them as a peer. I think if I could go back in time, I would just start acting successful before I was, because I think success is attractive to success. And I think when you think of the personality type of somebody who's like a CEO or a chief operating officer, as a CFO at a large or mid-sized business, or even a small business that's successful, like you've got 30 employees and you're making a lot of money and you're the head of that company, like these are very driven type A individuals who have gotten where they've gotten because of their willingness to fill leadership voids. If there's a void in leadership, they step in and fill it naturally. That's why they have achieved the success that they have in the position that they're in. So in a sales interaction with them, as you're walking through the sales process, if you leave a vacuum for the person taking the lead and saying, this is how it's going to go, this is what we're going to do, this is the next step, this is what I need from you, this is what I need it by, their personality is going to naturally step in and fill that void, even if it's purely subconscious, because the people who are successful in that world are people who just get really stressed out and like can't handle situations where no one's taking charge. So if you're not taking charge assertively and confidently, then they're going to assume that you don't have what it takes to drive this process to its conclusion, and they're just going to step in and do it for you. And you're going to be less successful because they don't know what the process should look like. So if I'd understood that earlier, I think I would have been successful more quickly.
Well, what else that you wish you knew early, like that first year that you wasted time on, or you could have condensed a couple of years of pain into 6 months of pain?
Yeah, yeah. For me, it's the one phrase that I've heard over and over again from almost every sales manager I've worked with. Presently, that's not the case, fortunately, but most sales managers who I've worked with, most successful salespeople I've talked to, most sales gurus I've heard from, I just can't tell you how many times I've heard the phrase, people buy from people they like. And that was just so ingrained into me that I just decided, like, I guess I have to be likable now. I've got to figure that out. That's a skill set in and of itself. Like,
Been working all this time on being unlikable.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm over here trying to sell. I have to learn how to make people like me too. Like, God. So I spent so much time trying to be likable, and that's just never going to be my strength. If I had known what I now believe to be the reality, I think it would have done a lot better. But my perception is people don't buy from people they like, they buy from people they trust. And it is true that rapport can be a stepping stone to trust. And for a lot of kind of more traditional, extroverted, like type A salespeople, rapport is for them, and likability is for them a, a tool in their toolbox that's going to be for them the path of least resistance to getting to trust. But for me, that's not the case. So if I had understood that the end goal is trust, not likability or rapport in and of itself, I think I would have identified earlier on in my sales career, hey, for me, the path of least resistance to trust is credibility and attention to detail and expertise and a willingness to and an ability to identify needs that they perhaps might not be aware of, and an awareness of the industry that allows me to relate to them on a level that perhaps my competitors are not. And if I'd known earlier on in my career that the goal is trust and that likability or rapport is one path to the top of that trust mountain, but that there are many paths to the top, I think I would have started searching for those other paths earlier on.
And I think you did the right thing, because if one is uncomfortable or inauthentic or unnatural, why not do one that is?
Yeah. Yeah. I think you see like a lot of salespeople trying to sell in a way that's not natural for them. And it's a compromise against their own personality. It's a compromise against their own strengths. And they're less successful because of it. When the reality is, like, most of the lowest performers, like at a company like mine, where it's publicly traded company, most of the salespeople who work there have a track record of being successful at something, right? And so when you look at the people who struggle, they're not struggling because they're people who lack the ability to be successful. They're people who are struggling because what they have done before to make them successful isn't working in this context, or maybe some other circumstances changed. I think it's easy to just try to emulate what successful people are doing, as opposed to asking the question, like, what does the best version of myself look like in this context? And I think having the confidence and sense of self-worth to identify that can be a powerful mechanism to achieve success. I think it's hard to replace that with anything else.
Cool. Hey, David, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
I don't know, nowhere probably. I don't do social media at all.
It's up to you.
I'm on LinkedIn. If you want to look at my name, David Dennison, you can high five. Cool. It'll probably take me like 3 weeks to respond to you. But if you're a buyer who's in my market, you'll probably hear from me with a cold call at some point in the next couple of weeks.